This black woman, Grandma, got pregnant. At 61, they said she stole the baby. Enjoy the story. The sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across Ruby Johnson's weathered hands. At 71, those hands had picked cotton, changed diapers, buried a husband, and now cradled a miracle. 10-year-old Isaiah sat at her feet, his bright eyes fixed on the wooden chessboard between them as Ruby's fingers hovered over a knight. Outside, a car door slammed. Ruby's shoulders stiffened slightly. She recognized the sound of judgment before it even knocked. "Your move, Grandma," Isaiah prompted, unaware of the approaching storm. Ruby smiled, the deep lines around her, eyes crinkling with affection. "Patience, child, some moves take time to consider." She placed her knight strategically, then glanced toward the window as footsteps crunched on the gravel path. The social worker was early today. The front door of Ruby's modest Chicago home, the same one her late husband Walter had purchased in 1972, displayed a small brass plaque, "The Johnsons, Esther 1965. What it didn't say was how many battles had been fought to keep it standing, or that its newest resident had shaken the foundations of everything Ruby thought she knew about life's possibilities. "Mrs. Johnson?" The crisp voice belonged to Ms. Jacobs, clipboard already positioned like a shield. "We need to discuss some additional documentation regarding Isaiah." Ruby's hand found her son's shoulder. "Isaiah, go finish your homework in your room, please." As the boy disappeared down the hallway, Ruby straightened her spine and invited the woman inside. Another day, another battle to prove what should never have needed proving at all. The trouble began when Ruby was 61, though the real story started long before that. After Walter died, the house had fallen into disrepair. The roof leaked during Chicago's brutal winters, and the steps to the porch had begun to rot. Ruby's daughters, Darlene and Patricia, lived in Atlanta and Los Angeles respectively, their lives too full for more than occasional phone calls and holiday visits. When Marcus Williams knocked on her door that spring morning, Ruby had initially shooed him away. At 34, with shoulders broad enough to carry troubles and a smile that dimpled his right cheek, he seemed too young, too handsome to be offering legitimate help to an old woman. "Ma'am, I noticed your gutters are pulling away from the roofline," he'd said, hat respectfully removed. "I do carpentry work. I could fix that for you at a fair price." Ruby had seen too many scams targeting elderly folks in the neighborhood. "I'm not interested," she said firmly, beginning to close the door. His foot didn't block it as she'd half expected. Instead, he stepped back. "No problem. But if you change your mind, I left my card in your mailbox. I've done work for Mrs. Tanner down the street. You can ask her about me." 2 days later, during a thunderstorm that sent water cascading through her ceiling into 3 strategically placed buckets, Ruby found herself dialing his number. Marcus worked efficiently, speaking only when spoken to. He arrived early each morning for a week, repaired what needed fixing, and left without lingering. Ruby found herself making extra coffee, then sandwiches, then eventually inviting him to stay for dinner. Their conversations started with pleasantries about the weather, but gradually deepened. "My Walter built this house with help from his brothers," she told him one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch. "Couldn't get a decent mortgage in this neighborhood back then. White loan officers always found some reason to deny us." Marcus nodded, understanding without needing explanation. "My father built houses too, taught me everything I know before the cancer took him." Somehow, in the spaces between their words, something unexpected blossomed. Ruby found herself watching the clock before he arrived, choosing her better dresses, touching her silver-streaked hair self-consciously. The absurdity of it made her laugh aloud one morning, a woman her age acting like a schoolgirl. When the repairs were complete, Marcus still found reasons to visit. He brought her vegetables from his community garden plot or books he thought she might enjoy. Their age difference hung unspoken between them, until the evening he reached across her kitchen table and covered her hand with his. "I know what people would say," he said quietly. "I don't care. I haven't felt this way about anyone in a long time." Ruby withdrew her hand, heart racing with emotions she'd thought long buried. "Marcus, I'm old enough to be your mother." "You're old enough to know your own mind," he countered gently. "And I know mine." When Ruby's daughters visited that Thanksgiving, they noticed the changes immediately. Their mother's brightened eyes, the careful attention to her appearance, the mysterious phone calls she stepped outside to take. When they discovered the truth, the argument shook the little house to its foundations. "He's using you, Mama," Patricia shouted. "What does a man his age want with a woman your age except your house or your savings?" "I raised you better than to speak to me that way," Ruby responded, her voice quiet but firm. "I've lived long, enough to recognize a good man when I see one." Darlene, always the pragmatic one, tried reason. "Mom, just think about this. How will it look? What will people say? You've been a respected member of this community for decades." Ruby's laugh held no humor. "Respected or just tolerated? I've spent my entire life being careful, never too loud, never too angry, never demanding the recognition or equality I deserved. Always the quiet, dignified black woman who knows her place." She shook her head. "I'm done living for other people's comfort." Her daughters left early, disappointed and concerned. The church community, where Ruby had faithfully served for 40 years, reacted with similar dismay when Marcus began accompanying her to Sunday services. Elder Johnson pointedly asked about her nephew visiting from out of town. Sister Williams suggested a nice senior citizens group that might be more appropriate for Ruby's social needs, but nothing compared to the scandal that erupted when Ruby, at 61 years old, discovered she was pregnant. The doctor, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, confirmed what 3 home tests had already told her. "It's extremely rare, Mrs. Johnson, but not impossible. Your particular hormonal profile shows you experienced a very unusual late perimenopause. However, I must warn you about the significant risks." "Will the baby be healthy?" Ruby interrupted. "We'll need extensive testing to determine that, and frankly, I'm concerned about your health as well. Pregnancy at your age? I've survived picking cotton under a Mississippi sun, marching for civil rights, burying my husband too young, and raising 2 headstrong daughters alone," Ruby said calmly. "I believe I can handle this too." The whispers began immediately. At the grocery store, conversations halted when Ruby entered an aisle. Her regular seat in the 3rd pew at New Hope Baptist remained conspicuously empty around her. Anonymous calls came in the night, questioning her morals, her sanity, her claim to the child growing within her. One evening, Ruby returned from the doctor to find Marcus sitting on her porch steps, his expression grave. "They fired me from the Wilson Project," he said without preamble. "Said they heard things about my personal life that made them uncomfortable." Ruby lowered herself beside him, one hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen. "I'm so sorry, Marcus." He turned to face her, eyes fierce with determination. "I'm not. They can take my job, they can talk all they want, but I won't let them take this family we're making." He placed his hand over hers. "Will you marry me, Ruby Johnson?" They wed in a small civil ceremony, with only Marcus's mother and aunt in attendance. Ruby's daughters declined the invitation. The pregnancy progressed with difficulty. High blood pressure, swollen ankles, and constant monitoring. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about geriatric primigravida complications when they thought Ruby couldn't hear. When she collapsed, in her 7th month, rushed to the hospital with preeclampsia, the nurse's whispers grew louder. "She claims it's hers. Probably her daughter's baby, she's claiming. Who does this at her age?" The emergency C-section nearly took Ruby's life. She lost consciousness as they extracted her tiny son, waking hours later to find Marcus holding a small bundle beside her bed. "Isaiah Walter Williams," he whispered, placing their son in her arms. 5 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect. Ruby traced a finger along the baby's cheek. "Hello, little one, we've been waiting for you." The real battle began when they brought Isaiah home. Anonymous calls to Child Protective Services suggested Ruby and Marcus had acquired the baby illegally. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid encounters. Longtime friends suddenly couldn't remember Ruby's phone number. The investigation was humiliating. DNA tests, interviews with hospital staff, questions about Ruby's mental competence, documentation of every prenatal appointment. One afternoon, Ruby ventured to the corner store for diapers. Isaiah bundled against her chest. A woman she'd known from church blocked her path on the sidewalk. "Whose baby is that really, Ruby?" she demanded loudly enough for others to hear. "You need to stop this charade. That child ain't yours." Others gathered, openly staring. Someone took a photo with their phone. Ruby clutched Isaiah closer, her heart pounding. "This is my son," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "My flesh, my blood, my blessing." "At your age, you stole him, and everybody knows it," the woman sneered. Ruby drew herself up to her full height, dignity, wrapping around her like armor. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said quietly, "and what he gives no one can take away." She stepped around the woman and continued walking, head high, though tears threatened. That night, as Ruby rocked Isaiah to sleep, a brick shattered their front window. The note attached read simply, "Child thief." But somewhere between the accusation and the 10th time they were reported to CPS, something shifted. The DNA results confirmed what Ruby had always known. Hospital records were released, proving she had indeed given birth. And slowly, the community that had shunned her began to reconsider. Their pastor, Brother Reynolds, was the first to visit, hat literally in hand. "Sister Ruby," he began awkwardly, "the congregation and we've been misguided. We allowed judgment to overcome compassion." Ruby, seated regally in her living room chair with 6-month-old Isaiah on her lap, merely nodded. "Yes, you did. We'd like to formally welcome you, Marcus, and little Isaiah back to New Hope. Perhaps we could arrange a proper christening." Ruby studied the man who had once counseled her through Walter's death, who had praised her faithful service to the church, and who had remained silent during her greatest trial. "Thank you for the offer, Pastor. I'll discuss it with my husband." Gradually, the whispers transformed into apologies. The same neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid her now stopped to admire Isaiah. Former friends brought belated baby, gifts and casseroles. Even Ruby's daughters eventually called, tentatively asking to meet their half-brother. Ruby welcomed them with open arms but clear boundaries. "You can be part of his life," she told them firmly, "but respect must extend to all of us, including Marcus." By the time Isaiah turned 10, the past scandals had largely faded into community memory. Ruby's miracle baby had become a neighborhood fixture, bright, curious, and doted upon by his elderly mother and his father, now in his mid-40s. The social worker's latest visit was just routine follow-up, though the constant monitoring still rankled. As Ruby closed the door behind Ms. Jacobs, Marcus pulled into the driveway, returning from his construction job. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her expression. Ruby smiled, the weight of years and battles visible in her eyes but not in her spirit. "Everything is as it should be." That evening, as Chicago's summer twilight painted the sky in watercolor hues, Ruby sat on her porch swing, watching Isaiah play basketball with neighborhood children. Marcus worked beside her, repairing a loose floorboard. Isaiah made a perfect shot and turned automatically toward Ruby, his face alight with accomplishment. "Did you see that, Mom?" The word, simple, common, yet hard-won, still made Ruby's heart expand. "I see you, son," she called back. "I always do." In the kitchen, a cake waited for tomorrow's celebration, Isaiah's 11th birthday. Ruby had baked it herself, though her arthritis made decorating more challenging these days. The house would fill with guests, Marcus's family, a few of Isaiah's school friends, even Darlene and Patricia flying in for the occasion. As darkness fell, Marcus joined Ruby on the swing, his arm around her shoulders. At 71 and 44, they had defied odds, expectations, and sometimes common sense. But sitting there watching their son's silhouette against the glow of streetlights, Ruby knew with absolute certainty that some miracles arrive precisely when and how they're meant to, regardless of the world's readiness to receive them. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly based on appearances or assumptions? Share your thoughts in the comments. The years had taught Ruby that dignity wasn't in silence, but in standing firmly in one's truth, even when that truth confused or threatened others. Her hands, now gently folded in her lap as she watched her family, had held cotton bowls, protest signs, a husband's hand as he took his final breath, a newborn against all odds, and finally, her own power. Would the final chapter of her story be one of continued judgment, or would the world eventually see beyond its narrow expectations? Ruby had stopped concerning herself with such questions. The miracle wasn't just Isaiah or her late-life love story, it was the freedom she'd found to live unbound by others' limitations. On Sunday morning, Ruby helped Isaiah with his tie before church. The congregation that had once withdrawn now embraced them, though Ruby never forgot those empty pews and turned backs. As they took their seats, Marcus, Isaiah, and Ruby, she noticed a new family being greeted with stiff politeness. A young white woman had married an older black man. Their blended family was receiving the all-too-familiar sideways glances. During the fellowship hour, Ruby approached them, extending a hand and a genuine smile. "I'm Ruby Williams, welcome to New Hope. We sit in the third pew, and there's always room if you'd like to join us next Sunday." The relief in the woman's eyes spoke volumes about what she'd already endured. Ruby recognized that look, had worn it herself not so long ago. That night, as she tucked Isaiah into bed, he asked the question she'd been preparing for years to answer. "Mom, why do some people still look at us funny sometimes?" Ruby sat on the edge of his bed, choosing her words carefully. "Some people believe life should follow certain rules, about who should love whom, when women should have babies, what families should look like. When they see something different, it can make them uncomfortable. Like us?" "Like us," she agreed. "But discomfort isn't always bad, Isaiah. Sometimes it's the first step toward understanding something new." He considered this, his young face serious. "Is that why you always talk to the new people at church? Because you understand?" Ruby smiled. "Yes, and because someone should have done the same for us." As Ruby closed his door and moved through her quiet house, the house where she'd grieved, Walter, fallen in love with Marcus, brought home Isaiah and weathered storms both literal and figurative. She felt a profound sense of completion. Not because her journey was over, but because she'd reclaimed the narrative of her own life. In her bedroom, Marcus was already asleep, one arm flung across what had once been her side of the bed alone for so many years. Ruby slipped beneath the covers and placed her hand gently on his chest, feeling its steady rise and fall. The challenges weren't over. Isaiah would soon enter adolescence. Ruby's health required more monitoring than she liked to admit, and the world remained quick to judge what it didn't understand. But the foundation beneath them was solid, built not just of wood and nails, but of perseverance, forgiveness, and unyielding faith in possibilities. Ruby Johnson Williams had lived 71 years in a world that repeatedly told her what she couldn't or shouldn't do. As a black girl in Mississippi, as a woman in Chicago, as a widow, as an older mother, each time she had quietly but firmly proved them wrong. That, she decided as sleep began to claim her, was perhaps the greatest miracle of all. You are amazing. If you genuinely enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. It's a great feedback for me. If it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you that change is still possible, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you.